Our scripture this morning comes from the 5th chapter of Mark. Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 42. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell before him and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately, aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make such a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them to tell no one and told them to give her something to eat. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Time I've been searching for peace in some void. I was trying to blame all my ills on the world I was in. Surface relationships used me till I was done in. All the while someone was waiting to free me from sin. He was there all the time. He was there all the time, waiting patiently in line. He was there all the time. Never again will I look for a fake rainbow's end. Now that I have the answer, my life is just starting to rhyme. Sharing each new day with him is a cup of fresh life. Oh, what I've missed, he's been waiting right there all the time. He was there all the time. He was there all the time, waiting patiently in line. He was there all the time.
This morning, our text happens immediately after the event that I talked about last Sunday. You'll remember Jesus had went from Capernaum to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He had drove the demons from a man into a herd of swine. They forced the swine over the cliff, and the swine died. Upon seeing that, the people around begged Jesus to leave. So our text begins when he got to the other side of the sea. They asked him to leave, and he left. And what he encounters there is an amazing event. Actually, two miracles, two stories. We're looking at two stories because Mark chose to interweave these two stories together. That's a characteristic of Mark's gospel. Mark likes to start a story, and before he finishes that story, tell another story, and then go back to that original story. He does that at least 4 times in his gospel. And by doing that, Mark forces us to compare and to contrast these stories. When we first read this text, it seems like, well, the only thing they have in common is that they're two miracles. But I hope by the time we leave today, we'll see that there's much more going on than just two separate miracles. Jesus is back into Jewish territory. Like always, there's a crowd around him. I wonder if he had began to teach or if he was just greeting the crowd. I don't know. But this man comes toward him. Now, I think everybody knew who this man was. Mark tells us that he was a ruler at the local synagogue. Most scholars would agree that probably is the synagogue in Capernaum. We're told that his name is Jairus. Now, this man is not used to going to people asking for favors. He's used to being the one people come to, asking for favors. But on this day, he goes to Jesus and he begs. And he begs Jesus for help. You see, Jairus has a problem that Jairus can't solve. Jairus' daughter, his little girl, his 12-year-old baby is sick. And she's not getting any better. Now, something tells me when the disciples see Jairus, and I think they knew who he was too, they are wondering how Jesus is going to respond. Because you see, the religious folks have already started making trouble for Jesus. This is Mark chapter 5. The religious leaders began to get mad at Jesus in Mark chapter 2. They started calling him a blasphemer way back then. They're really getting on Jesus' nerves. So the disciples are probably wondering, okay, let's see how Jesus handles this. One of his enemies is coming to him. How is he going to respond? He told them to turn the other cheek. He had told them to do to others like they would have them do to them. I wonder if they thought, now is Jesus going to practice what he preaches? If they thought it, they were very well surprised, because Jesus does not treat Jairus any different from anyone else who had come to him asking for mercy and asking for help. Jairus says, please, Jesus, my daughter's sick. Please come lay hands on her so that she can be healed. Jesus says, okay, Jairus, let's go. And then Mark presses the pause button. And Mark tells us a whole nother story. And I assume that while this other story is going on, Jairus is just standing there panicking. Can you imagine? I mean, you've got a sick little girl. Your daughter's at home. Your daughter is sick. And you finally reach Jesus. Jesus has agreed to go with you. And now it's almost like you're frozen in time because something else happens. You see, there's a big crowd all around Jesus. And there's a lady there. She has been hurting. She has been suffering. She has been hemorrhaging, this text says, for 12 years. I don't know exactly what was going on with her. When you read the scholarly interpretations, most think it was probably something to do with her female cycles, but we can't be sure. All we know is this lady was desperate. She had went to every physician she could think of. She hadn't got any better. She'd gotten worse, and much less, they had taken her money. She'd spent no telling how many copays not to get any better. We know how that feels, don't we? You go from one doctor to another doctor, and it seems like you're getting worse and worse. And she's desperate. But she hears about Jesus. And she thinks, if only I can touch the hem of his garment, I'll be healed. I don't know why she thought that. But when she sees Jesus going with Jairus, and the crowd starts to go as well, and I picture it kind of like a big mob scene. She thinks, this is my chance. This is my opportunity. And she slips through the crowd. And she touches his cloak. I don't know what she felt, but Mark says she knew that she had been changed. Then it happened. Jesus stops dead in his tracks. And she thinks, uh-oh. Jesus stops and Jesus says, who touched me? And the disciples, they're thinking, Jesus, there's a lot of people here. Everybody's touching you. Why are you asking such a thing? But you see, Jesus felt power leave him. This has nothing to do with this particular sermon, but we find here that every time Jesus helped someone, Every time Jesus performed a miracle, it took something out of him. It cost him something. He knew that something had happened. Who touched me, he says. And I think by this time she's back in the back of the crowd. And very sheepishly, she comes forward. And Mark says she tells him the whole truth. I can see the faces all around in the crowd thinking, whew, this woman's got a lot of nerve. Because in this society, if you were facing the situation this lady were facing, you're ceremonially unclean. If you sit on a chair, that chair becomes unclean. You are supposed to stay away from people. If you touch someone, they become unclean. Is Jesus going to fuss at her? Is Jesus going to say, how dare you? I'm getting ready to go help a little girl, and who do you think you are? What is Jesus going to do? Jesus says to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Then Mark goes back to the first story. Jairus has been standing there thinking, woman, would you hurry up and finish your story? My little girl's sick. That's what I've been thinking. You've probably been thinking the same thing. And then he looks and he sees there's some people from his house coming, and his heart must have sunk because he knows they're not coming with good news. They say, Jairus, don't bother Jesus anymore. She's gone. Jesus looks at Jairus and Jesus says, don't believe them, believe in me. And Jesus walks to Jairus' house. I think he told the crowd, hey, you go home. Peter, James, John, you come. He gets to the house, and they had the professional mourners already there. They're weeping. They're wailing. Jesus says, cut that out. She's not dead. She's just asleep. And they did something you never do. They laughed at Jesus. Next verse is when Jesus had kicked them out. You don't laugh at Jesus. He kicks them out. He goes to the little girl's room. Get up, rise, young lady. She does. And then he says two things. Number one, don't tell anybody. Why not? Jesus didn't come to objectify this little girl. Jesus didn't come so that everybody would be asking her questions. Remember what happened to the blind man that he healed in John 9? All the religious folks come. Oh, was he good? Was he bad? Jesus doesn't want this little girl to go do that. And he says, give her something to eat. Now we hear these two stories, and they don't seem like they've got a lot in common. But there's one word. There's one word in both stories that connect them together and teach us some very important lessons. That word is daughter. In both stories, the word daughter is found, and in both stories, it's the word daughter that is the key to understanding the stories and the significance of them. In the first story, the father of this 12-year-old girl is the main character. Without his help, she would have never been healed. That's why there was no sacrifice too big for him to make. If he had to swallow his pride, if he had to accept his limitations, if he had to embrace a humble mindset and lay aside his public persona, he would do it because for his daughter's sake. The proud leader of the synagogue, who was prominent and was powerful, did what was inconceivable to most people. He begged Jesus for help. Why did he do it? He loved his daughter. And his love for her was stronger than his need to protect his image or to avoid criticism. Nothing that day was too difficult if it meant saving his daughter's life. Now, on the other hand, the woman who slipped behind the scenes and touched Jesus' hem of his garment, she had no advocate. No father was going to fall on his face before Jesus. No father was going to come and plead her case. She was all alone. And Jesus realized this. That's why when he turned and he said, "Who touched me?" and he sees her, he sees everything about her. He knows all about her. He knows her heart. He knows her situation. And the very first thing he says to her, "Daughter." Now, was she his biological daughter? Of course not. So why did he call her daughter? Well, first of all, he wanted to put her at ease. He knew she was frightened. He knew she was anxious. He knew she was feeling all alone and unworthy. And he also knew that she needed more than just physical healing. As important as her physical healing was that day, she needed her value and she needed her worth to be restored. Her fragile ego needed to be mended, and her spirits needed to be lifted. She needed to know someone cared about her and someone loved her like a father and a mother love a daughter. She needed to be part of a family. "Daughter, your faith has made you well," Jesus tenderly said to her. I wonder how long it had been since someone had called her that. How long had it been since she felt wanted and loved? How long had it been since she felt like anybody cared about her? How long had it been since she felt that safe and that secure? How long had it been since she smiled? How long had it been since she had a peaceful night's sleep? How long had it been since she faced a new day with confidence? Daughter, your faith has made you well. Jesus compassionately, Jesus confidently tells her, "Go in peace. It's okay now." How does this story speak to us on Father's Day? I think there's several lessons. First of all, everybody needs a family. That 12-year-old girl certainly did. But so did the woman who had been sick for 12 years. She had exhausted her resources trying to get help, and now she was all alone. They both needed a family. The little girl had one. And Jesus made sure that that family was a place where she could be loved and accepted and restored. Well, that other lady didn't have one. So Jesus includes her in his family. Now, there's a lot of people who have a big family. And families come in all kinds of shapes, all kinds of sizes, all different kinds of colors, all different kinds of families. I think the only thing every family has in common is every family is dysfunctional in one way or the other. Some are big, some are close. And then there are people like me. Some of us don't have very much family at all. You know, my parents got it perfect the first time, so they didn't have any more children. So I have no brothers, I have no sisters. It's just me and my mother. So what happens? If you've got a big family like this 12-year-old girl, that's great. But what about those of us who doesn't? Jesus had a plan for that. It was called the church. Because we are the family of God. And it's not uncommon for your church family to be just as close and just as important to you as your blood family. I mean, the other night, it's 12:20. I've just fallen. I stand back up. I know something's wrong with my arm, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Do I need to go to the hospital? Should I wait till tomorrow morning? I'm thinking, who is still up at this time of night? And for some reason, the first person who came to my mind was Amy. Now, is she my family? We don't have the same blood, but we're family. I texted, I said, you up? Praise the Lord, she was. She may not have been praising the Lord, she was still up, but I did that night. And I called her, and I feel silly about it now, a grown man calling somebody else to ask a bunch of questions. I have no idea what I said to her. It's a blur. But I do remember she was polite, she was caring, and I remember this, she said, well, if you wait and it's broke, they might have to re-break it. And I said, no, we ain't going to do that. And I know the next day, someone else brought me cake, put it in my mailbox. Not a blood relative, but family. The next day, another person sent me a text. I'm out doing errands. Would you like for me to bring you lunch? Not a blood relative, but family. For those who have family, biological family, thank God for that. But Jesus wanted this lady to know, if she didn't, there was going to be a place where she could be loved, where she could be accepted, where she could experience family. Everyone needs a family. There's something else here. Everyone needs a healthy, loving, supportive family who provides the best for them and brings out the best in them. Now that's tough to do. We are all so different. Like me and my mother can't do anything together hardly, because if we were going to move this chair, I would want to do it one way. She would want to do it another way. And our minds just do not work the same. My mind doesn't work the same as a lot of people. That's what happens when you're brilliant. But, we need to see the best in each other. And a family is a place, a church is a place where character and maturity and responsibility are passed on to us. And that's why we need to be together. One of my concerns during this pandemic, and yes, worshiping online is great. And I'm glad we had YouTube. And I'm glad we had all those things during this time. But my concern is that people will get to where they think that is a substitute for this. We need to be together. There's something just about being in each other's presence that really makes a difference. And the last thing I want to point out if there are problems in our family, our biological family, our church family, we must fix them. We must fix them. Relationships are messy. That's because we're all a combination of good, bad, and ugly. And all of us are capable of undermining and sabotaging the relationships we cherish the most. That's just human. But our divine nature will not settle for less than our best, and it demands more of us. And we must, if our home is broken, if our church is broken, if our relationships are on life support, we must fix them. We must stop making excuses, stop counting the cost, and break out of our shell and demand that things get fixed. How would this story have ended differently if Jairus would have said, Jesus can help her, but we're not on the same team here. He thinks differently than I do. He's trying to undermine our good religion. I'm not going to go ask him for help. You see, that relationship with his daughter was so important that he was willing to risk everything. Our family, our biological family, and our church family should be that important to us. Because I am confident that when Jairus put down his defenses, when this lady put down her defenses, they were both very glad they did. And I think you will be too. So open your heart. Open your arms. Open your home. And reach out to those who need it. And make them feel like part of the family.